Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Security Boulevard webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for any of our panelists, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also happening at the end of today's webinar, we will be doing a drawing for 6 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 6 lucky winners. All right, with that, I will go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Threat-Informed Defense, Transforming the Security Organization as We Know It. Our speakers today are Chris Kennedy, who is the CISO over at ATT&CK. Hey, Chris, how you doing? Thanks for joining.
Hey, thanks, Charlene. Great, happy to be here.
We also have Pete Luban, and I apologize if I mispronounced your last name, but he's head of cybersecurity and IT risk at Dimensional Fund Advisors. Pete, thanks for joining today. Good to have you here.
Howdy. Happy to be here. Thanks very much.
Awesome, awesome. And then finally, we have John Fung, who is Associate Director of Cyber Content and Threat Hunting at Raytheon. Hey, John, thanks again for joining. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys. I know you guys have an amazing presentation, so I'm going to let you guys get right to it, Chris. I'm put myself on mute, take myself off camera, and enjoy yourselves.
Cool. Thanks, Charlene. I'd like to thank Security Boulevard for having us, and I'm looking forward to a spirited conversation today with Pete and John. For the audience knows, like, the security community's very small. Pete and John have had an opportunity for our paths to cross in the past, and so I think it would be worthwhile for the audience to hear, the immense credibility that comes from this panel today in terms of the experiences they've had. So Pete and John, can you give the audience just a 60-second breakdown of your experience in the cybersecurity industry?
Yeah, I can go first.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Pete. So, yeah, John Fung. I've been doing cybersecurity now for approximately 8 years. Started out working on the network engineering side, slowly progressed into cybersecurity side. Before that, did kind of a whole myriad of things. I was pit boss in Vegas. Did surveillance at the Mirage, catching card counters. I was a prison guard for a little bit. Got to meet O.J. Simpson. That's one of the highlights of my career there.
Wow.
And then it turns out I wasn't built for law enforcement work, so went back to school, and now I'm in cybersecurity. So yeah, I started out doing working in the defense industrial base, working at on some Navy projects, some strategic projects. Went to the financial industry where I met Pete and Chris, and then stayed there for a little while. And now I'm back in the defense industrial base over at Raytheon, building out their, well, technically it's called Hunt and Detection Engineering Services, but it's a content and threat hunting program, looking for, advanced adversaries, things that evade normal controls.
That's a relatively new concept as well, the fact that role exists and it's a focal point for Raytheon. So I'm really excited to have you here today to talk a little bit about your lessons learned in running that kind of mission. Can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I got my start in the industry around 1998 in Wall Street, actually on Wall Street, working for proprietary trading firms. This was during the birth of the firewall, the PICs for all you security folks who've been in the network/security space in the early days. That quickly sort of catapulted me into in risk management, and I decided after many years at Citigroup and a few financial startups to get out of the financial space and get more into high technology. And so at that point in time, I was at Yahoo and I was doing risk management at Yahoo. Came back to New York and was doing a bunch of other startup stuff in the internet advertising space, again focused on cybersecurity and risk management. Wound up doing a stint at Google during the birth of the SRE movement, which really influenced quite honestly, the rest of my career, and maybe we'll get into some of that later. I bounced out of Google to go to Bridgewater, where I met Chris and John. Left Bridgewater to go to Netflix, back to the West Coast, and most recently migrated from the West Coast to Austin, Texas, where I'm essentially the CISO at Dimensional Fund Advisors. I have this really nasty habit of jumping back and forth between finance and tech, and I still haven't decided which one I like better, but we'll see how things go, I guess.
I learned something, take it to finance, make it lucrative, learn something. I totally get the pattern.
Yeah.
I'm Chris Kennedy. I'm the CISO of Attack IQ. I ran tech security at Bridgewater. I was a 12-year defense industrial base guy as well, built out the U.S. Department of Treasury Cyber Ops program, and was a Marine Corps officer, one of the Marine Corps' first information system security officers. So I was kind of born into the cybersecurity industry. So it's so awesome that our paths have crossed in both multiple ways. We kind of look like a DNA helix if you were to do that plot line there. So let's get into the talk a little bit about threat-informed defense. This I consider kind of one of the emerging revolutions within the security industry if you properly embrace it. And I'm glad you're here with me to talk about it, because I think you guys are certainly making strides with what I know in terms of adoption. Before we jump into it, it would be inappropriate, especially for the three of us with where we come from, to not talk about the responsibility map and the required abilities of the security organization and security leader, and what the accommodating design and processes are. I found this from a blog from the gentleman Rafiq. I can't remember his last name. It was very useful in terms of describing what the role is and where we're going in this conversation around threat-informed defense. My takeaway from looking at this map, and my apologies to the audience if it's an eye chart and you can't see it, is that, wow, there is a lot to do. The security executive leadership team has to carry with it both a tremendous amount of responsibility and a bunch of different kinds of abilities and skills: soft skills, contract skills, human resources skills, strategery, budgeteer. You got to be a technologist and a security practitioner. And that lends itself to a tremendous amount of firefighting and complexity. I would be curious, your guys' perspective. I mean, Pete, you're in one of these roles. John, you're deeply influential. Is this right? Is this a doable job? And what does this mean to you guys? Let's start with you, Pete.
I don't know if you meant to advance your slides. I don't see anything other than your what's it called slide, but
the transformation, the challenge.
Is it a doable job? Yeah, it's a doable job. But the thing about a job with so much complexity and so many ins and outs is, this is not it's not a place for jacks of all trades, so to speak. You can't do everything excellently, and so you need to really make sure that you understand where to focus. Right, and this is why risk management has been a focal point in my career for a long time, because I feel like if you do the risk thing right, it teaches you, or it tells you, or informs you where you need to go look. And I think that's sort of the essence of threat-informed defense. Is like we're defenders, right? That's what we're here to do. Risk is an intersection between threat and vulnerability, and as long as we understand threat and we do that a good way and let that inform our risk management framework, then I think we know, out of all the many things that we're responsible for, where to focus at any given time. That's kind of my philosophy on it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. John, I'm curious your perspective. You have a role that's, I think, deeply influential to that today. And so what do you think?
Yeah, I think the hardest part is we're trying to take technical challenges and risk that we're facing on a technical level, and we're trying to translate it into something that can be consumed by the whole organization. So what I mean by that is we're thinking about what a threat-informed risk means. So if we say that, like, this adversary is going to hit us and it's going to cost us this much money, in all these exaggerations, and it's like hundreds of millions of dollars, or it's going to be the end of the world. A lot of times that falls on deaf ears, because it rarely is a realized cost. And so what we end up having to do is we take that number and we translate it into what it would actually be financially as an impact to our stock price. And so now we're speaking a language that who we ultimately report to, which is the CFO, that they understand. It's like, if this adversary were to hit us based on the damage it would do to us reputationally, like we would lose $2 per share. And then all of a sudden now you have something that caught their attention, because that's now something that they can communicate to the board with.
Got it. Got it. Give me just 1 second. I'm having a little bit of sharing difficulties here. I'm not sure what I've done wrong.
The live demo gods, man.
I know. Right. Let's try this one. See if this works better. All right.
F5, bro.
I'm there, man. I'm there. That's not working. Just a moment. Let me bust this apart over here and see what happens. I got a fancy 2-monitor system, I think, that's totally screwing with GoToWebinar is what I think's going on.
It reminds me of that show, the IT crowd, where like, did you try turning it off and turning it back on again?
All right, is that better now?
No.
What do you guys see it?
Yeah, we're seeing the edit view, not presentation.
You can just put it in presentation mode.
Got it.
Well, no.
Yeah, sorry for the delay.
You're seeing the presenter. We're seeing your presenter screen, not your main screen.
Yeah, just a sec.
I'll tell you what, guys, while Chris is wrangling with his PowerPoint, I do want to remind the audience that the questions will be accepted anytime during today's webinar. So if you have a question for Chris or John or Pete, just go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and then we'll get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar.
Yeah, if anybody wants to know anything about cybersecurity, how to count cards in a casino, how to cheat at craps, I'm the guy.
There you go.
This webinar takes an entirely different turn.
All right.
GoToWebinar doesn't like my split screen today. So this was the graphics that we were talking through in terms of like the difficulties with the role. And so let's just keep on moving. I put together a chart. It's kind of the outcome of the complexity of what that responsibility entails. And so what I kind of did is just walk the security organization, and I talked about like what the real challenge set looks like. And so I can just run through a couple of these, but like threat management is a relatively new field. I mean, it's like only been around for 10 years maybe. And because of that, it's a limited body of knowledge and a kind of an emerging trade craft. It's often been largely focused on how do you share indicators of compromise and things like that. And it's not really a standardized discipline. As you know, John defined his role. It's kind of unique to his environment and how he's applied it. Risk management's a very difficult field if you even have the wherewithal to do it. And the way that maturity assessments are done, the influence of compliance as a key risk, the fact that your assessments that you do to inform it are often temporal. The outcome is that you make bad security investments based on the outcome of that. Security operations is becoming the most important control in the environment as we move and pivot away from preventive controls and business enablement through monitoring and response. But you just don't know if the SOC works until you're in the middle of the breach. And then testing itself has been historically very difficult, very expensive, and non-repetitive. Does this resonate with you guys, or does this make sense to you? I mean, what do you guys think in terms of like what are some of the key challenges you've dealt with in your roles?
Yeah, one of the challenges that we run into is we're forced really to build two programs. We have to build one that solves the operational issues of security, but then in order to bid on different types of business, things like that, there's certain audit requirements that we have to meet as well. So we find that sometimes we're building an organization that is either optimized to actually go and do the thing, or you're going to build an organization that's optimized to pass an audit. And it's one of those things that for the longest time, finding the right thought leaders inside the organization that can find, the point where all of these things meet, the tip of the pyramid, that's the hard part. Is it's easy to build an organization that passes an audit. It's easy to implement technology. It's not easy, however, to build technology that satisfies that requirement and meets the mission and the spirit of it. And that's one of the hardest things that we've been running into. And as you mature down this path, whether you're measuring yourself with CMMC or CMI or any of these frameworks, NIST, whatever, is to the slide, like threat intel, knowing what your threats actually are. That's not until like advanced maturity. You know what the actual threat space is way too late to actually make any type of budgetary or investment decisions early on. And so then you end up with wasted capital and wasted energy in trying to solve these problems that turn out aren't making you any safer.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Pete, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I try and run a somewhat traditional security organization in that there's separation between engineering operations and sort of the GRC front of things. Like on the risk management thing, you're inundated by frameworks, but at the end of the day, like my job anyway, working for a giant asset manager, is I have to make sure that we're focused on board reports, we're focused on audits, we're focused on regulatory compliance, we're focused on blah 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 blah. But none of that really focuses on the governance piece to make sure that like what goes on inside the company isn't putting us in a terrible situation. And this is many hats to wear, which is very difficult for the people that have to do it. And like unfortunately, like I have to dedicate 30% of my entire staff to what I'll call GRC, when most of it is really the C in GRC. And in the security operations space, which is literally the lifeblood of my operation, it is how I stay on top of things I need to stay on top of. When you talk about the overhead associated with running an operations organization, the day-to-day, literally, like if you want to call it the daily tasks, is the 60 to 70% consumption of resources to do all the manual nonsense and the this is and that's, just to make sure that that stuff's not piling up over here while you're trying to consider what the next thing is to do. Automation, to me anyway, like automation, especially in the security space, is a very new concept. But it takes time and it takes understanding. Threat on the threat side of things, like this is a very strange space to me, right? Because I can go pay money to get my hands on an organization of people, hundreds, if not thousands of people, who are dedicated solely to developing that intelligence. Like I cannot be expected to do that myself at the scale and the rate of change in the world today. And I can go on and on and on, but there's just difficulty that stripes across all four of these things.
Yeah, totally get it. And John, to your point, I call it the two teams paradigm, and it's kind of the where we're at. Like here's an interesting example, at least to the operational side, not even to the compliance side. We'll talk about that a little later. This is a quick and dirty illustration that kind of spells out the security operations center and the technology ecosystem that fuels that analyst, which is, Pete, to your point, the lifeblood of what you do. And all of these sensors, your endpoint security technologies, your network sensors, your security information management, your threat intelligence feeds, your SOAR platforms, your workflow that drives the analyst, like these are all the things that can break. And most of these technologies often don't even come with good operational management capabilities, as in like, did you know the endpoint service failed silently, and how do you deal with that? Or somebody switched the network around and blinded you to certain kinds of traffic, and you have a way to check for that. The reality is, like, if any of that stuff breaks, your analyst doesn't have a shot. I mean, I was born in operations. Like I've been burned by this many times. Like, what's your guys' experience in terms of running operations with this kind of challenge?
It
says it right there.
Yeah, one of the absolute worst things to happen is when you discover an incident via one technical source, log types, metadata, whatever, and then the logic that you deployed months ago stopped working because a critical log feed failed, visibility changed, things like that. And it's a really bad situation to be in. As practitioners, we're really good at knowing what bad behavior looks like. It's kind of like how the Supreme Court defined, well, pornography. You know it when you see it. Well,
Yeah.
we don't have a really good idea of what normal looks like either. And that's the challenge, is that when something that we're counting on breaks, a lot of times it's missed in the background because we're already, from an investigative bias, only looking for the negative side of it. We're not looking for what should be there.
Yeah. I think through like how I initially started building SOCs, and it was a collect all the things mentality. Like, we'll figure it out on the backside. The reality is, like, even that doesn't work if you're not collecting all the things. Have a way to check that.
Yeah.
So Pete, like, what's your journey been like in this space?
Man, so over the years, it's funny because a lot of the reliance that you put on things that enable you to put your job has moved out to the vendor space. I hate to say it, but I have to rely on Microsoft. I have to rely on whatever endpoint solution I have. I have to rely on the threat intel that I get. And what I find is this is extremely variable. There are solutions that I purchased that I know I can rely on, that have a proven track record and haven't burned me in any way. But there are solutions that we invest heavily in that are completely unreliable. And not only are they unreliable, but when we do get burned, like, it's so black box that I have no way to know why, right? Or how it's going to get better, or like, it's all this stuff. And the problem with that is that happens all the way up front. And when something goes wrong, it trickles all the way down to the end. And like, I need to stop it up front. I need to be aware of it up front. I need the visibility, like the SIM thing and the spam thing and the malware thing and the email thing. Like, it's become such a large, variable, shifting, changing problem, that I literally need to put my trust in the people who sell me solutions to be able to keep up with that stuff. And it just doesn't always work. Yeah,
I hear you loud and clear. More transparency, better requirements generation, better validation is certainly a recurrent theme. So entering the threat part of this, we got this thing called MITRE ATT&CK now. And for the audience that should hopefully knows what MITRE ATT&CK is, it's an open source adversarial threat framework that expresses what we know about what threat actor behaviors are. And I think this has been probably one of the fastest adopted across industry frameworks that I have seen in my career, because to the point of threat, we now have something to anchor to, that we now expresses at least the commodity behaviors of what these things are, and you can do a lot of things with that. Are you guys attack fanboys and like on the train, and what do you think about it? What does it mean for you?
Yeah, attack's huge. I mean, it's 100% the way that I approach things. And one of the discussions we had was, does MITRE ATT&CK solve everything? No. But the enemy of what's the saying? Like, the enemy of accomplishing something is perfection. Like, this may not be perfect, but it's pretty damn close, and it gets us where we're at and gets everybody on the same page. And it allows you to make really good decisions that aren't qualitative based anymore. Now you can say, we need to do this thing or make this change or buy this technology because it solves these actual problems, not because like the Lockheed kill chain, where you'd say, oh, well, it stops at weaponization or persistence, something like that, where it's like this broad category of things. Here it's granular enough that you can actually tie metrics to it. And so then it makes it so we can have like non-opinion based discussions about security with stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, I would, everything I'm going to say is essentially going to echo that. Like, to me, like, so this is like kill chain 2.0, except for the thing is they've added a second dimension to it, right? Like, yeah, I get it. There are things that happen left to right, but in every one of those stops you make along the left to right, the variability is deep and is always changing. And not only that, like, this has become one of the most valuable research tools for my red teamers / purple teamers, right? Like the ability to theorize TTPs at sort of any point in time on this left to right situation, and literally relate it to either things that we see or things that we care about, and go drill in and do research on the literal instantiations or manifestations of those potentialities is the thing that makes this probably the greatest threat management framework in the universe right now, as far as I'm concerned. And honestly, you know, during my due diligence, when I'm looking to buy new technologies or invest in new things, this is always a subject for conversation. I want whoever it is that I'm partnering with to understand that this is a better way to do that thing.
Let me ask you guys a direct question. You're buyers, you buy products to defend your enterprise. Think back 5 years ago when you were in a buyer role, or when you were in a buyer role in your career. How did you define functional requirements? How did you define, like, what was your decider? What helped influence like this product over that product? How did you do that?
Yeah, usually it would come down to like very specific use cases that you had. Like if you're looking at email gateway or something like that, you would actually talk about a very specific campaign and say, you know, how do you detect this? And then because you're using those, a lot of times it was easy for the vendors to mislead you on capability because those are softball pitches, because they come in ready for it. Whereas, you know, luckily today things have evolved, you know. I mean, to Pete's point exactly, you know, if you're going to do business with somebody today, you want to see how they stack up on this, because now it's no longer, you know, an opinion. It's a fact. Can you detect this thing? Yes or no?
Yeah. I mean, 5 years ago, man, you were there. Like, what's the hot thing going on right now? Oh, it's malware. Oh, it's spam or whatever. Like, we have a solution that'll take care of that. And like, we know that you're a business and you only have a 3-year life cycle. So all you need to do is give us your money and we'll hand you the thing that gets you through the next 3 years. And then we could talk again down the road. Like these types of things, right? I think in 5 years time, the landscape has changed in such a considerable degree that like the hot thing changes day by day instead of year by year or whatever it is, right? And even though the hot thing, whatever it is, ransomware, malware, even that changes with extreme variability in very short periods of time. And so like, and this is what I'm saying is like, it's about putting your trust in that solution to be able to protect you from the things that you care about. I feel like this is a way to get it all on the table and say, great, do you guys consider all of these things? Like, I get it. You're trying to sell me a point solution. I don't need a point solution. I need something extensible enough that lets me look at it through the lens of this type of framework.
It gives you some architectural readiness as well. Like you, instead of that narrow, that's how you end up with 75 to 100 platforms in your environment, because everything's a point solution.
Yep.
Now you have a definitive way to like begin consolidation, rationalization, and optimizing your spend on technology. Yeah, I can tell you, like, you buy stuff based on a good salesperson, the industry analyst report, the peer review, the bennies that come with it, and the roadmap of integration, and frankly, the non-functional requirements, like, will this thing integrate into my workflow and things like that. And so I think you see what's happening, like with MITRE evaluations and whatnot, how, you know, MITRE ATT&CK is becoming kind of the de facto way to analyze a product's efficacy and provide data back. I think that's great work. And, you know, we've not had a good way to do that. So that's just one of, I think, many places that ATT&CK applies. But, you know, ATT&CK's attack's a relatively, I'll say it's a new framework. It's been around for about 5 years as well, but it's really getting legs now. But this concept of applied threat intelligence isn't particularly new, at least not from my perspective. But I can tell you from my perspective, threat intel 5 and 10 years ago was a DoD bubba that that had access to CIPRNet and JWICs, and was my conduit to classified indicators of compromise that I actually couldn't really operationalize because they came from classified sources. So all I could really do was reactive searches against aggregate data to determine if I had a thing. But if I touched that IOC, I would get fired. In terms of like if I hit that C2 channel because it was a known active hot C2 channel or something like that. And that's just such a terrible, expensive way to operationalize threat intel. And so I think this is like where attack creates the game changer functionality. With all of that body of knowledge, there's all this cool stuff you can do with it. Like, has that been your guys' experience with this? Like in terms of like what you've seen what threat intel was?
Yeah, so I've seen that there's been more of an evolution of threat intel from, atomic indicators, IOCs, IPs, hashes, things like that,
Yeah.
to, what do they actually do? Almost like you're reading the adversary's playbook. And so going back to MITRE ATT&CK, what it allows us to do is say, okay, well, we don't have great visibility at credential access, but we have great visibility at lateral movement and persistence. And so then it allows you to target that adversary at those particular junctures. And so like you're able to quantify what your weaknesses are, and by knowing that, you can guardrail by going to your strength. So that's what the evolution of threat intel has allowed us to do, is know, okay, like IOCs are what the adversary did, TTPs and behaviors, that's what the adversary does.
Yeah. What do you think, Pete?
That's a great way to put it. I mean, I don't know how many of y'all remember, if you go back 5 years, we were getting like the ISAC threat feeds, and this was sort of revolutionary at the time. But the thing was, it was a fire hose, and it was just so much.
It's a whole nother industry too. Like you can buy these fire hoses now, or back then. Yep. You still can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I paid you to just like dump information on me. And so the thing was, like, I'm reading it in emails. There's no programmatic implementation of this thing. It's not really a source as much as it is a place to go and peruse and just find all the nasty garbage that's going on in the world, quite honestly. And I think the evolution of threat intelligence has been more towards understanding the need for people like me and the rest of us to have that be a programmatic source, right? And not just have it be a programmatic source, but be a programmatic source that I can actually apply in some way to make a differentiation between what matters and what doesn't.
Yeah, I'm like literally like why I pivoted the slide, because like what I see at the highest level is that the attack has introduced the opportunity for threat intelligence as a profession to evolve to a much more strategic capability. I mean, frankly, my history, it was a luxury. Like in the maturity curve of your security program, it was the last thing you went and got because you had so much other stuff to do. Now I think it's one of those things that's so important, it becomes one of the first things you do, because it can radically impact what you're actually doing. That body of knowledge that's available in attack and the automation behind it. This is what MITRE actually defines what being threat informed means. And so I'd be curious, like, what does this mean for you guys as practitioners when you see these words of threat intel integration, focused collaboration, and defensive threat engagement? Like, you guys are threat informed defenders. How do you do that stuff?
Well, so I guess starting from the integration, when you start looking at the way you integrate it, so now we can, start creating content and control strategies specifically around, what the adversary's tactics are going to be. So, MITRE ATT&CK, everything going left to right is tactic, or, what they're going to do, and up and down is how. So this lets us deal with all the hows and pertaining to the whats. Talking about like the defensive engagement of the threat, not only does it allow you to know, like I said, talking about IOCs, where the attacker is now, it lets you know where they're going to probably pivot to next, and so you can build your controls that way. And then just kind of work my way around the circle around sharing and collaboration. There's a lot of emphasis now coming out on in the environment, talking about how to share intel, how to share rules and detection logic. And, one piece of it is common language, what you're saying. And the other part is, the format that you deliver it in. And so you see when you start mapping, what we're trying to detect, via MITRE with how we want to detect it with something that's open source, such as like a Sigma rule or something like that. Now you can take that intel and you can quickly share it with other people, other groups who may have a different tool set than you, but still face the same threats. Like, it allows the portability of intelligence now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like starting from threat intel integration, I mean, what this means to me is, I used the word a couple of times already, like the programmatic integration of threat intelligence. I don't want to have to go look for it, right? Like I just want it to be there, and I want to be able to use it as a source to enrich or enhance the other operational activities that I have going on, right? And I feel like focus sharing and collaboration is an enhancement in and of itself in the threat intelligence space. I think it's funny because you try and theorize a future for the MITRE ATT&CK framework, you can almost look at it as a heat map, right? And if we're able to figure out some way to derive data around what people are actually seeing in the world, and it could be completely anonymized, it doesn't have to expose anything, and sort of just show what's going on in that framework in terms of what's going on in the world, that makes me more able to kind of understand the risk associated with that landscape. Defensive engagement of threat is actually the thing that where I'm at right now is something relatively new. In my organization, the security organization, believe it or not, is very young. It's only been around for a handful of years. The concept of understanding what defensive engagement means is getting away from the very, very tactical, fire drill, dealing with what's coming at you kind of thing, and using what you understand about threat and using a framework that's very applicable to have a strategy instead of just being super reactive about what's going on in the environment. That's what this all means.
Yeah, that's the big shift that I see in that is like the security organization has been top-down driven by a controls framework. And now there's a shift to having it being driven by a threat framework. And that's really powerful. Also, the collaboration thing, I just wrote a blog on that. It's, the Australian government just shared out 61 TTPs known for attacking Australian networks. I'm like, what a meaningful shift that is, that the government's embraced MITRE ATT&CK, is sharing TTPs back to the local population. They can operationalize that to defend themselves as the most probable attacks. Let's talk about automation for a second and how that fits, because that's a key enabler. It's why attacks is picked up. And I use this as an example of the difference in automation that exists today and how it hasn't existed. If you think about vuln management largely addresses initial access, how the attacker gets a foothold. You patch the system, the attacker can't get that initial foothold. And there's a tremendous business industry around that today. It's about $2 billion and technology spend already. And that said, it's self-automated, a self-licking ice cream cone. Uh-oh, where's my sharing paused? Oh, I got to pop up, sorry. And so with that, the rest of the kill chain is where most of your security budget and most of your operational and compliance effort focuses in terms of the security controls you have. Yet there's never been an existing framework to actually measure and benchmark the effectiveness of those things, or automation to validate that it actually works. And I think this is where like where Attack IQ fits and the breach and attack simulation space is getting legs so fast, is that when you look at it in the spectrum of the kill chain, knowledge of the attacker behaviors, we've got this automation and well-established industry that was born because MITRE created CVE and CVSS. And now we have another framework that's created by MITRE, and now there's another burgeoning industry that can help improve security on that. So I'm curious your experiences, especially, I think like vuln management's kind of, dare I say, kind of played out these days, because the reality is like it's almost futile in terms of that. And you really got to focus on the core controls that are post breach, because that's where most of your money is. That's where most of your ROI is. And the attacker's inevitably going to get a foothold. So let's build this thing in layers. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's funny. One of the things that everybody thought was going to happen was there's going to be this huge uptick in attacks and breaches with everybody moving work to home. But by and large, I don't think organizations have seen it at least manifest in the way that they expected. And it's because like all of those perimeter controls, the things that get scanned through vuln management, those defenses, they don't have to fail all the time. They only have to fail once, and then the attacker's already in.
Yep.
And so the hardest thing to train people on and to instrument is secondary and tertiary effects of what that breach looks like. And so now, instead of looking for 0 days and what the adversary is going to do in order to get that initial access, you're looking for, okay, well, what are the discovery operations they're going to engage in? How are they going to start scoping, mapping, maintaining positive control? And so that's where you start finding that all these adversaries start intersecting. Like there's only so many ways to skin a cat, and once they're inside, you got to focus on those ways.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Pete, when we pregame, you talked a little bit about your challenge here. I'd be curious your perspective on what your journey's been in dealing with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, look, I mean, like when it comes to vuln scanning, like sure, it's automated. You press a button, you do a vuln scan, right? But like then it spits something out, and what do you do with it, right? Like
Yep.
I run the vuln scans with some periodicity. It shoots out a report. It gets sent to the people who are system owners, and it goes straight to the shred bin, right? It's true, because like everybody's got their own priorities, their own work, and the thing that's interesting about the place where we are in the industry right now, and I think this speaks very broadly to threat-informed defense, is great. Now I can take what comes out of my vuln scanner and I can combine that with what I know about threat, and I can combine that with what I know about my environment, and I can then produce something that becomes actionable. And then not only that, I can go feed that to my security control testing platform and go and actually show that these things either are or are not exploitable. And then I can hand that to my infrastructure guy and be like, hey, guess what? Like, I owned you, somebody else can own you. Like, you got to go deal with this stuff. And I can use that and ship that up the chain. And that's the thing that's changed, right? Like, like years ago, when it came to managing vuln, like this was a monumental bazillion-dollar effort to like get a system in place, operationalize it, have it produce reports, build a function that goes to try and hold people accountable to remediating those things. And then it's always this trade-off between like, well, we got more important things to do, right? And now I hold up the thing and say like, no, I mean, this is pretty important. Like you're going to get popped, right?
Yeah, it changes the accountability model completely.
100%.
I don't want to steal too much of your thunder. I know you're going to want to talk about that here in a moment. This is a bit of an eye chart, but as you start thinking about what MITRE ATT&CK can do for you, and the adoption of what threat-informed defense means, I went into my customer portfolio of Attack IQ, and these are basically all the customers that use breach and attack simulation with MITRE ATT&CK in all these different ways. And it's all just adversarial testing using ATT&CK. And I don't want to go into all of them, but look at all the use cases. The top pillar represents, your traditional GRC operations and engineering architecture functions. But like, it was fascinating to me when I put this together of like, wow, this is why this is so important. This thing can be used everywhere. This is why it's such a meaningful change to the industry. Do you guys agree with this? Are you guys doing a lot of this kind of stuff, these kinds of applying these kinds of use cases, given that you've adopted threat-informed defense within your organization?
Yeah, without going into a lot of details, high level, yeah, we've implemented quite a bit of this.
Yeah, sure. Like, same thing. Like, I can't go into excruciating detail, but what I can tell you is, the central point of operations in my world is SOAR. Now, like, this is a big buzzword now. To me, the most important thing to me is leveraging something like SOAR to be able to not only pull in all the things that are important and make sense of it, but to go reach out to all of these different things in the organization, right? I spend a lot of time and a lot of focus on putting certain skill sets in the hands of the people that work for me so that they can operate with the understanding that there's a central point of administration and you're literally designing the logic that will go and influence every aspect of security and compliance in the entire organization.
Yeah.
So yes, we touch all of this.
Yeah, right on. I want to pick up the pace a little bit, only in that, like, I know you guys got some kind of use cases you want to talk through, and I want to make sure that you get a chance to do that. Just a moment, let me get my mouse back. What I did is I took this concept of these use cases, and I took that security organization chart that we talked about and just started overlaying them within the organization. And so this is where you get to see, if you adopt and elevate threat, this concept of threat informed defense, like this purple circle in the middle, to me, John, is you. And this is all the different places that you can take advantage of MITRE ATT&CK and testing and emulation strategies to improve these core processes across the entire security organization. So that said, let me pivot off that. I wanted to bring that point up, but I want to make sure that we reserve time for your case studies. Let's talk about the threat real quick. Before we do that, though, like, what do you guys see in terms of trends with the threat? We've got this thing, attack, that defines what the threat actors do. What has been your experience in the last year?
Yeah, I mean, you're still seeing the number one attack is against the user. People are still attacking users like crazy, through email, social engineering, whether it's on, networking sites, things like that. Like, people are still going after the user because they're the one thing that we have difficulty instrumenting. With that being said, you are seeing a pivot into the way that people are getting initial access, and I would expect that. You're starting to see an uptick in infrastructure attacks. Some definite CVEs that affect enterprise grade infrastructure have come out in the last year. So if you haven't seen those, I would expect to see those. So we're starting to see that now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. So user, definitely. And like, given the current state of the world and what's going on and the whole work from home strategy, like, maybe the risk posture of the organization hasn't changed much, but I think what's going on in the world has changed quite a bit. I think adversaries are shifting from, the payload, so to speak, to the social engineering or the psychological engineering of people based on what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
And yes, there's broader targeting, but even so, even within broader targeting, I think there's more specific targeting, and specific targeting being, I think you see like ransomware as a great example. You're seeing ransomware that is essentially tailored towards a specific industry at this point, right? It's not a broad, just like crypto thing. It's like the Honda hack that just happened just recently. Like that stuff keeps me up at night. It's just a matter of time before that gets to the financials.
Yep.
Yeah, and what you're starting to see is ransomware is being incorporated into other types of attacks as well.
Yep.
So you'll have an adversary run loose in your environment, stealing all the goodies, and then the last thing they do is encrypt everything.
That's that's what that shared techniques means to me. Like, you're seeing this convergence of, just like we know what these attack techniques are, the attackers are sharing these techniques and mash, like, they're Lego blocks for us, they're Lego blocks for them. And so, Fin 7 is no longer Fin 7, it's Fin 7 plus the Lego blocks they bolt on that also brings a ransomware flavor to it, or a new C2 channel or whatever. Which means, like, you can't just treat these assessments of what APT 29 looks like is black and white. You have to have a thinking part of the organization. can take advantage of that. Yes, I've seen a lot of that. I think you guys have as well. So John, when we pre-gamed, you wanted to talk us through a little bit of like your journey to evolving your security operations into threat hunters. So I'm really interested for our audience to hear that.
Yeah, so we've made this big investment over the last few years into technologies to solve problems. But fundamentally, technology can be bypassed, controls fail, and that's where threat hunting comes in. Threat hunting finds all of those systematic failures in existing process and controls, and it allows you then to start closing down those gaps. Content development, threat hunting, they're two sides of the same coin, really, because if you all a threat hunt really is in its limited scope is an idea of what bad behavior looks like. Well, if it turns out that it's high fidelity, well, now that's content. And so then that feeds into your continuous monitoring process. We do lots of different types of hunts, but then you'll have collections of these where you actually look for an adversary that gets bundled together. But, basically the whole process is, what does this adversary do? APT1, what do they do? And then you take that, you map it all out. You spend as much time as you need to create those hypotheses of what each one of those techniques would look like, the hows. And then you determine, do I have the proper visibility to find this? If you do, pseudocode it. What does that look like? Then you go and you find the thing. You evaluate the results. You operationalize content as needed. You inform stakeholders, escalate findings, and then you just rinse and repeat. Like, this is a continuous thing. Like, you should be doing this day in, day out. Like, if you're not in a fight, you should be looking for a fight.
How do you make time for that? Like, in terms of like the resourcing for that?
Yeah, it's hard. So what you tend to do is you have your group doing different rotations. And so you'll have some people doing, tuning and operationalization of the content. You have to test it, make sure it doesn't break anything. And so you have people owning that, making sure that it's properly vetted. You have people who will actually go out and do these adversary-based hunts where they're looking for a particular person or group. You'll have people doing database hunts, which is more ephemeral because now you're looking for what shouldn't belong in a data set. Like, you can't articulate what you don't know, but you should be able to articulate what you do know. And then you start looking at that tail. And then you have to support like the tactical day-to-day. And so, Patch Tuesday comes around, all these CVEs come out. Are people exploiting this thing? So we have to start hunting for that. And you'll find that if you proactively break down what these attacks are, you can beat like open source reporting from like the big security vendors by days. And it may not sound like much, but it's huge when you're proactively finding, bad actors trying to get in before other people do.
Got it. Pete, you got a really interesting use case as well. We're meaningful management of time. We've got 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure you have an opportunity.
I'll explain this in 1 minute. I know that there's things wrong in the environment, and I know that there are people who need to own the risk associated with those things that are wrong in the environment, and they need to fix those things that are wrong in the environment. And they swear up and down and they promise me that they're going to go fix those things in the environment. And it never happens. And so I've got a tool to essentially illustrate why it's bad, but I've also got a tool to break their stuff.
So the tool, the why it's bad, is attack, a definitive, like threat-informed way of showing like this is what the attacker can do. Yes. And then the tool to break their stuff being your attack simulation platform, where you actually break their stuff and show them it doesn't work.
Yep. And Attack IQ to me is an accountability engine, if you will.
Man, that's powerful. So, like John, you said, what is it? Don't wait for the fight. Take the fight to the enemy. Like, that's like a very Marine Corps thing for me. I love that. And then, I've now got an accountability weapon. Lots of fighting going on.
Yeah, fight's not always outside. The fight is often inside.
That's fantastic. Well, like, I think that's very powerful. We talked a little bit about the other part of your use case and like using attack simulation as a way to benchmark what technologies you need and how to optimize and rationalize. and whatnot. I've got a case study as well. I wanted to just quickly ski through a lot of bullets on here, but we already talked about it. Like the two teams concept of compliance is a real thing. And I think attack lends itself, if you can connect together this threat framework to the compliance frameworks that those people are beholden to, you can begin the automation of what are those results. And so this is I've got several financial institutions that deal with the two teams problem, and they want to automate some of this. And in doing so, they want to take advantage of the threat information that's available in attack, map that to the controls requirements that are in the compliance framework by TTP. And so it's a very powerful way of getting some value out of bringing the convergence and value of what compliance brings to you versus making it a separate pillar that you have to support. So that said, I think I've got a closing slide, then we'll get to quick questions, and then Charlene's going to close us down. My takeaways from this talk, which thank you again, Pete and John, for your time, were first, the concept of threat intelligence has evolved very significantly from what we knew it to be. The existence of MITRE ATT&CK and other threat frameworks and the maturity of this industry has enabled this role to become much more impactful. Not only that, it's enabled the creation of automation to operationalize this data, and it's available. You just have to go look for it today. I'm happy to talk to you about what we do at Attack IQ. This is a real key opportunity to innovate across your organization. Of my portfolio of customers, I think most of them are considered very innovative security leaders, and it's because they're embracing threat-based risk management. And that's kind of a new way of talking about risk management. And especially when you consider the climate that we're in today and what's going on economically, you know, it's more today to me about making sure everything you got is as effective as possible and optimizing and ensuring at the highest productivity possible. And a small investment in roles and thinking like John and Pete have, and putting people on the ground that can do this can have a multifold return for you. So let me see. Time-wise, I've got, I think, 60 seconds. So let's do one question, and then we'll hand it back to Charlene. I think the one question we had was a really good one. Like, where do you start? Like, what's the best way? Like, if I was to say I'm going to hire a Pete or a John to come in and build a threat-informed defense team for me, what would be the first thing they would do in 60 seconds?
Solve all the problems.
I love it.
Yeah, no, the first thing you need to do is understand your landscape. I mean, even something as simple as taking your controls to like MITRE ATT&CK Navigator, just so you know where you start. You know, a journey of 1,000 steps starts with that one step. So
yeah, I think the first thing you're saying is like you have to commit to it. This isn't a side gig. This isn't something you flick into the sock and say make work. You gotta begin the process, begin the step, and the maturation.
Yeah. In a tiny handful of words, don't focus on horizontal scaling, focus on vertical scaling, and vertical scaling is enabled through automation and integration. Pick the right solutions, get informed, understand the landscape, period, end of story.
Love it. Dude, I'm writing that down. That's awesome. Killer. Okay, well, John, Pete, thanks for your time. Charlene, I know we're pushing up on the edge here, so your show. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Thanks very much. Such great information. Want to thank you guys for joining me today. Do want to real quick do the drawing for the 6 Amazon gift cards, $25 each. So let's go ahead and just plow through that real quick. Our first winner today is Brian A. Congratulations, Brian. Second winner is Craig S. Congratulations, Craig. Third winner, David Q. Congratulations, David. Fourth winner, Gary C. Congratulations, Gary. Our fifth winner is Rick H. Congratulations, Rick. And finally, our sixth winner today is Roberto E. So congratulations, Roberto. We'll be following up with all of you offline by email to get your gift card over to you. So please check your email for that. Want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded, so you will be able to access it later on demand if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to watch it again. We will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. The webinar is also going to be living on the Security Boulevard website, so you can go find it there. Just go to securityboulevard.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Gentlemen, thanks again for your time. Great presentation, lots of fun stuff. Maybe next time we'll hear about card counting and card marking and all that good stuff. But for now, I do want to thank you guys for joining me. Also want to thank the audience for joining me today. But for now, this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody. Please stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Pete and John. Talk to you guys real soon.
All righty.